It's the year in review, MiWeek style. Grab some eggnog and cookies. MiWeek starts right now.
Recently, Michigan's economy has begun to turn around. Michigan's gained over 250,000 new jobs. We've paid off $20 billion in long-term debt. And our population is increasing for the first time in a decade. But to make Michigan a top 10 state, there's still plenty of work to be done. Step up and help put Michigan on top. Learn what you can do at MichiganTurnaroundPlan.com.
Funding is also provided by Delta.
Oh, you are. Hey, welcome to MiWeek. I'm Christy McDonald. Thanks so much for joining us. It is Christmas Eve, and there's no place else you'd rather be than right here on MiWeek with our contributors Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press, and the largest plate of cookies you have ever
this side of the
seen.
Mississippi.
So I have this idea, since the show is airing, right around the holiday time, that we would all bring in some special cookies that meant something to us, so, around the season. And I forgot. And it was my idea, and Stephen forgot, but that's just pretty much par for the course. But Nolan remembered.
Only one who can carry out an assignment.
I mean, pretty much. Right? If you want to depend on someone, depend on Nolan.
So I brought this tray of cookies. The women in my family all get together once a holiday season, make all kinds of cookies. My grandchildren decorated these little sugar cookies and that stuff. And I made these candy.
Okay, now
so
I have to
I'm not
say,
going to tell you what they're made of.
The candy looks a lot sketchier than the lovely plate of cookies that everybody else made.
Oh, man. Try that, Steve.
What is it?
So
I'll tell you when you eat it.
Can you see it?
No.
I'm going to put it in front.
Try
like that.
That's not bad.
That's good, isn't it?
It looks like a petrified cinnamon roll that never baked.
So you know what these are made out of?
What? Peanut
Mashed
butter.
potatoes.
Really?
Mm-hmm. These are mashed potatoes candy.
With,
Isn't that good?
With what in them?
A whole lot of sugar. It's like about a 10-to-1 ratio, sugar
Really?
to mashed potatoes.
I thought there was at least going to be bourbon in it or something.
No, it's peanut butter and a whole lot of sugar.
Those would taste good with bourbon.
My
Peanut
my
butter,
aunt used to make these.
Mashed potatoes and sugar.
Get some cookies.
All right, that's good. Okay, so I figure, we've got the food for thought here, because for the next half hour, we're going to sit back and we're going to look at 2015, the year that was, and talk about some of the biggest stories that happened here in Michigan and around the world. And to prepare for this, and I know you guys have been preparing for it for the last couple of days. You're like, what are we talking
We've been thinking about nothing else.
I know, but I tried to sit down and I tried to make a list of what were the biggest stories from 2015. And you can't look at my list, but go ahead and start throwing out what were some of the biggest.
Supposed to bring
Hard to
a list?
No, you weren't supposed to bring a list, but I'm just going to ask you kind of off the top of your head, what were some of the biggest stories? Because the AP always comes out every year and says that, the top 10 stories.
I remember past a certain point, past a certain
November. Let Steve go first because I'm eating.
All right, well, just go ahead and just start throwing out stuff. You don't have to go for a total list. Biggest story of the year. I mean, and not just Michigan.
No, that's a good. It's a gay marriage equality, right?
Yep.
Supreme
Yep,
Court.
the Supreme Court decision.
That happened this year.
Also, I mean, I think you have to look at the largest story would be ISIS and the rise of ISIS
Terrorism.
and the concerned terrorism around the world.
That's another one.
Paris,
Paris attacks.
both of them. Charlie Hebdo was in January.
Charlie Hebdo, that's right.
Right. San Bernardino.
Was Sandy Hook this year? No.
Sandy Hook was no.
That was
was
last year.
No, it wasn't. It was like 3 years ago.
ago.
Yeah. I'd say the refugee crisis.
Yeah.
In the world.
Yeah,
And
we finally got a road bill passed in Michigan. It wasn't a great road bill, but it was 4, 5, 6 years in the making.
Yeah.
So.
all right, so let's talk about that. So I guess if you want to, we'll launch off a little bit in terms of Michigan. So the roads deal, I mean, it was one of those things
It's a bad deal.
Well, but it is a deal though, and you can say that it's an okay deal.
So here's the thing that continues to bother me about it.
Okay.
Rick Snyder, before he was governor, when he was running for governor, this was on the list of things that he said was, the most important, among the most important things for Michigan to deal with. And he very quickly, after he won, said, here's what I would do about it. And it's hard to even remember the details of that first plan, but it was all new revenue coming mostly from, I think, a gas tax and
it's the only way to do
registration fees on cars. 4 years later, we come up with something that doesn't look anything like what he initially put out there, and doesn't do.
Does that say anything really about Snyder? Or does that say
I don't
anything
think-
about the
and I'm not-
reality of politics in this
yeah,
state?
I shouldn't. I mean, I should make clear. I'm not just poking at him. I think it is a failure on his part, but it speaks to the difficulty. If it takes 4 years to get from where he started to where we are now, I mean, if you think about just how broken the system has to be for that to be the case on something as universally accepted as the truth that we don't pay enough or we don't generate enough money to take care of our roads. This is not that much of a partisan issue. Everybody agrees on the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
But 4 years and you can't come up with a reasonable solution. I think it really does speak to and again, I'm not just blaming the governor here. It just speaks to
No.
broken-
I think it goes to the bigger issue that we're talking about, the state legislature and how our government operates and how things are able to get done or things are not able to get done, Nolan. So give me like a state of where we are at the end of 2015, going into 16, where we stand in Lansing a little bit.
I want to stay with the road bill just a second. I mean, I filled my truck up this morning at $1.69 a gallon. Michigan has some of the lowest gas prices now in the nation. It was a lost opportunity. You could have put a 15-cent gas tax on, raised all the money you needed for the roads without doing the vehicle registration fee, perhaps, and without now having to play all of these accounting games with the general fund budget. And gas would have still been well under $2 a gallon. And that's half the price we were paying just 2 years ago. And so I see it as a real missed opportunity and a failure of leadership in Lansing.
All right, well, talk to me now about, take that next question step forward. Where are we in terms of how our legislature operates, how deals are able to get done and not able to get done, and what do you envision for this next year?
Well, not much, because
Election,
it's an election year and the Republicans are extraordinarily worried about losing their majority. Democrats are targeting the House, making the House a priority. Republicans have been having trouble recruiting enough candidates to run in all the seats they have that are term limited. They have more term limited seats than the Democrats do. I think it's going to be a year in which it's going to be a struggle to get much done. And there's some important things that need to be done. You got the Detroit education bills.
Right.
Still didn't get introduced in December as the governor had hoped. You're flat out looking at bankruptcy by spring if the legislature doesn't act. And then you have the energy bills that are very important for business and commerce in the state. We got to get an energy plan in place. This is tough legislation. I don't see lawmakers doing much tough lawmaking in an election year, do you?
That's really disappointing, seeing as, I mean, the decisions have to be made are pretty large, and especially looking at Detroit Public Schools.
We didn't even see the bills drop on that this year, which I think really portends poorly for the next year. I mean, no one's going to want to make the funding decisions that need to be made there in an election year. You're essentially asking state legislators or outstate legislators to have to go back before their voters next year after having agreed to shift money in a way that would pay off what the state ran up here in Detroit. That's not going to be a very popular thing to do. This was the window to do it, though. I mean, at least this would have given them a full year before they had to go in front of voters. I don't know how you get it done next year at all.
Well, you got to get something done. I mean, something's going to happen. This isn't like the road bill where it can go to lame duck.
Yeah, that it can go
or
for
push, because they're going to run
3
out
more
of
years
money.
from
They're
now.
going to be insolvent, and that debt belongs to the state one way or the other.
Well, it does.
They go into bankruptcy, all of that obligation, all of that capital bond debt,
Comes
and
due.
the operating bond or operating debt, all of that comes due immediately.
Yes.
And so the state, I mean, whether a court would force the state to pay it at once, I don't know, but that's a possibility. And so the state faces that bill now instead of the orderly pay down that the governor has proposed. It's a clear decision, I mean, that has to be made. And if they piddle around and do nothing, this thing's going to go to bankruptcy and it'll be a flat out mess.
Well,
And you can look at it monetarily, and but I think also the instability of the school system in general. I mean, you're having these sick outs, you're having teachers that are calling in, you're having schools that are shut down. So the longer that things languish, the longer that there is no one clear direction of where this is going, the worse it's going to get.
Well, and the other sort of the other thing that this points to, though, is that it's the legislative leadership that can't get anything done. I mean, you have the governor out with a plan that he came up that he and the mayor were able to figure out their differences. He and the coalition in
Right.
Detroit were able to figure out their differences. What they can't do is get the Senate Majority Leader and the Speaker of the House to be able to rally enough people to vote for the bills. And
It's not just that, Steve. I mean, the coalition and the governor are nowhere near together, and the Detroit
But there's
delegation's not on board. It's hard to ask the outstate lawmakers to get behind this if the Detroit lawmakers aren't going to be behind this.
but that's also about legislative leadership, right? I mean,
It's leadership at a number of levels. I mean, the coalition is just simply not interested in the governor's plan or the governor's plan as presented, and they've not been
my
able to
understanding
move
is that
together.
there's enough of a bridge between those two to come up with a compromise that everybody could have lived with.
Well, they haven't been able to do it, and that's why what I'm hearing is the governor is going to split off the financial piece and do that first.
Yeah.
And the risk there is that you lose your leverage. He loses his leverage in trying to force the other reforms he wants. The structural, the way the district
Sure.
operates, the way the governance is structured. I think he loses his leverage if he fixes the finances first.
Let's look at Detroit in general over this past year. What has your reaction been to, I mean, where the city is going? Its momentum, would you say momentum coming out of bankruptcy in this last year? And did you think that we'd be at this place last year at this time?
Yeah, I think there's very little surprise about where we are a year after the bankruptcy, ended. And I mean, there's the bankruptcy. Again, I think it unfairly gets freighted with a lot of expectations that had nothing to do with bankruptcy. Bankruptcy was about reorganizing the debt to free up enough cash to plow into services that had not gotten money in a long time.
Well, to make people's lives
Make
better.
people's lives better. But that is, that's a chain of events. It's not something that springs from the initial event. And so we reorganized the debt. There's a little more money to go into services. Certainly, we're not paying as much of what we were bringing in to debt as we were before. And so services are a little better. Police response is a little better. They're going to give police raises for the first time in a really long time in Detroit, which may attract some more people to do that job. Garbage service is better. DDOT service is getting better, but it's a long haul. I mean, the city was so bad for so long, and the decline took 6 decades. You hate to counsel patience. You hate to keep telling people to wait and wait and wait. But the truth is that there are not easy fixes to this solution unless you're willing to talk about a completely different way of doing this, a completely different way of funding local services in Michigan. And I believe that we ought to be having that conversation in Lansing. But I think I'm one of 5 people who wants to do it. So,
We can get your other 4 people
it's just
and get yourself a meeting. One thing that strikes me also is talking about employment in the city of Detroit. Though the levels have gone down, but you still need to be able to have jobs available for people in the city, and then have the training for them to be able to get good paying jobs.
Well, it's the latter that's the problem. I mean, there are jobs in the city. It's just we don't have enough Detroiters trying to take those jobs. There was a community agreement for the new stadium project where they would hire 50% Detroiters to do the work. They're not getting anywhere near that because they can't find the carpenters, construction workers, bricklayers, et cetera, in Detroit to do those jobs. Meanwhile, almost every one of the city public school districts' vocational training centers are either shut down or barely populated. We should be training those kids now to take really good middle-class jobs that are being created in the city. These construction jobs are good jobs, and there's going to be a lot more of them. There's something like $4 or $5 billion in proposed projects for Detroit. These kids should be getting trained in the training they need to take those jobs, and it's just not happening. I think the Illiches said there was one category of worker where they needed 50 and they found 3, to meet that quota, that promise. We're failing these kids in Detroit and the workers in Detroit.
You know, one of the things that when you talk about what difference has the bankruptcy made, when it happened and while it was going on, one of the things I was talking about, one of the things that I think it had the potential to address was a real disconnect between people in Detroit and the political class in Detroit. That we had politicians on the city council, in the mayor's office for a really long time who didn't feel as though they had to be responsive to what was going on in people's lives, what was going on in the neighborhoods. If things didn't work, the answer was always, well, that's just the way it is. And emergency management and the bankruptcy were an interruption in that broken system in a significant cultural way, I think. And if you look at what Detroiters are talking about now and what they're saying about the political class that now is in charge, the city council and the mayor, there's a whole different relationship there, and it is built on an accountability that had completely disappeared. And I think that's one of the things that long term will make a huge difference in the way that the city operates.
But you don't want them to be too cozy. I mean, council needs to play that check and balance role, and I'm
with the mayor, of course.
I'm particularly, concerned with the questions that are being raised about the blight contracts. The council ought to be hawking that and making sure those contracts, there's no cronyism involved, make sure it's a competitive process, because we're looking to get a whole lot of money from the federal government for blight removal.
Yeah.
If there's a hint that money is being misused, if there's favoritism, if there's cronyism, we're going to get cut off.
And we did talk to the mayor last week, and you asked him about growth, population growth, because it's one of the things that he's saying, look, judge me.
He's saying the only thing that he wants
the
to be
end of
judged
my first term if there is growth in the city. And I think it was interesting. He said he believes it's already
They
happening.
think, I mean, they think that they have numbers, and you look at population growth in lots of different ways. The census is one way, but one of the things he talked about was new utility hookups, which gives you some sense of how many people are moving into places in the city. And I guess by that measure and some others, he and his staff believe that we have turned that corner, and that at minimum we're not losing population anymore. We may be growing. I don't know if that's true or not. It would be remarkable if it were, but even if we're close to that, I think it does sort of mark a significant change. We're talking about a city that has lost population in each of the last six or seven censuses, dating back to 1960. That's a long time. That's a really long time, and he's right that the only way to grow the tax base and to get even more money for services is to get more people here. So,
is he running for governor, Steve?
he said, I had a conversation with him about this and asked the question as many different ways as I could. He had very specific answers about why he was not going to do it,
So
and
the
they were
answer
things
was
I
no?
hadn't. Yeah, he said things that I hadn't really contemplated, things that would hold him back from doing that. And I don't think I think it's reasonable to assume that he might like to have a job like that, that he has that kind of ambition. But I think the practical realities of Detroit and Michigan and sort of what's going on here really make it difficult. Principally, he'd have to run for mayor in 17.
Right.
And the only question people will be asking him during that campaign is, are you running for governor? If he answers yes, then
He's done.
Then he can't win that. If he answers no and then does it, then he's,
And it's worse.
It's interesting to look at that. I mean, because we do have some elections coming up in the next couple of years,
Yeah.
and we're talking about it way too early, but the jockeying's going on early already. And I just wonder, will the mayor have any opposition in 17 when he runs? Who will run against him?
somebody will run against
But
him.
who? I mean, can you think of anybody?
I could think of some people who could take a shot. There's some members of council who,
Really?
Just because they hold elective office, have enough credibility to take a shot at it. There's some people in the legislature who probably think they should or could. And again, I think that that's one of the signs of trying to rebuild the relationship between the governed and government in Detroit. There should be healthy opposition to the person who's in office, right? It shouldn't be a given that if you have the job, you're going to be reelected. Think of the last time that was true. I mean, it's 2005, right? When the last time we had a contested election for when someone was mayor. I mean, there's been an open seat and a contested election. I mean, building that political class in a way that people who don't agree with the person who's in office have a legitimate space to mount a challenge.
I mean, Tom Barrow's still around. I mean,
Oh gosh,
I mean, not to disparage Tom.
no.
But, you know, I mean, we got to do a little better than that.
No, well, speaking about elections, let's talk about 2016 and what it really holds for now the presidential race that we're going to be talking about so much. And I find it when I look and I find the field of Republicans, I feel like I'm still grappling with who's going to be coming out in front and when are we going to start seeing candidates drop off. And Nolan, I want to ask you, I mean, what do you see now for these next, like maybe 3 months into 2016?
I wouldn't even begin to make predictions. Everything that's happened over the last 3 months has
You did not predict?
Well, nobody did. It's completely defied any logic, any past patterns. Republicans are now starting to talk about this whole process, going to the convention in Cleveland in July, unsettled for the first time since 1976.
Don't you think that would be really bad for the party?
Not necessarily.
So
I
Bobby
think
Shostak, the
not
former GOP chairman, I talked to him the other day about this. He says he doesn't think that's going to happen.
Well,
he's certain that this is still about a minority of voters dominating the polling, and that once balloting starts, this is all going to sort itself out, and you will end up with a nominee well before the convention.
You know that's possible, but I think before that happens, you do have to see some candidates dropping out. Maybe you'll see that after New Hampshire. Maybe you'll see it after South Carolina. But if all those primaries split, somebody different wins each one, or wins place or shows different in each one, I think you're going to have a lot of candidates continuing through this process for quite a while, and that makes it a little less likely that it'll be settled by the convention. I know, a lot of people say, "Oh no, it'll not happen," but more and more you're hearing folks sort of calculate this out and say it could go to Cleveland. I'm not sure that's necessarily a bad thing. I think you get a little more vigorous vetting of the candidates. You get people engaged in the process the way they have been watching these Republican debates. I'm not sure it's a disaster to have not to have everything sort of neatly packaged and presented.
Not a disaster, and they have been beating each other up a little bit. But I think what is maybe a little disastrous for the Republicans is the candidates keep getting questioned about, would you still support the Republican Party if the nominee ends up being someone that you don't support? That's what I see is a lot of the questioning of even do you still want to be or do you still want to support the Republican nominee? And that's what I think could be detrimental.
And that gets to this bigger cleave in the party. I mean, there was a wonderful piece by William Greider in The Nation this week about this split in the Republican Party and how it goes back to the Southern strategy that Richard Nixon engineered to woo Southern Democrats who were disenchanted with that party's embrace of civil rights into the Republican Party. There was a bargain essentially struck between sort of Northeast fiscal conservatives and Southern, old-time sort of bigoted conservatives that form the basis for the modern Republican Party. And what we're seeing is that coalition come apart, and that's what Donald Trump sort of represents, is the sort of the maturation and the voicing, the open voicing of that Southern wing of the party taking over.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I don't think Donald Trump's organized enough to be to be that controlling. I think
I don't think he controls it.
I think he's a phenomena that comes out of the discontent that we're seeing across the board, Republicans and Democrats. I think if any other candidate than Trump wins the nomination, you'll have unity in the problem.
no question about
if
that.
Trump wins, you'll have
You'll have a
disunity,
bit of
and that's
a
what
little chaos.
it's all about.
We only have about a minute left, and we didn't talk about the largest story of 2015, and that would be the Star Wars movie. That's
Yeah.
out. No Star Wars nerds among us here?
I am a huge Star Wars nerd, and I spent the days before the premiere of the new movie sitting with my son, showing him the old ones one last time so that he'd be up on what happened and where we left it
The
off.
nerd meter just started to go over into the red there, Stephen.
I won't. I don't dress up, but I will. But I will
I gotta say,
wait
I
in
won't dress
line
up.
to go see
Who
it.
would you dress up? I haven't seen a Star Wars movie since the first one. Who would you dress up as if you did, Steve?
Boba Fett, of course.
Oh my gosh, that was it. That's the last word. I can't say anymore. That's going to do it for the visuals. That's going to do it for my week. Have a happy new year. We will see you in 2016 with more great shows. Thanks so much to our crew here at Detroit Public Television, of course, Nolan and Stephen. I'm Christy McDonald. Have a great holiday. We'll see you next year.
Recently, Michigan's economy has begun to turn around. Michigan's gained over 250,000 new jobs. We've paid off $20 billion in long-term debt. And our population is increasing for the first time in a decade. But to make Michigan a top 10 state, there's still plenty of work to be done. Step up and help put Michigan on top. Learn what you can do at MichiganTurnaroundPlan.com.
Funding is also provided by Delta,